So in 2016, I think the idea that they had been co-opted by a Russian intelligence operation just sounded like, a spy novel, not real.
The Soviets were notorious for featuring any kind of tension between races in the United States.
I believe in Russia they do have their own manual. It puts out or essentially prescribes what to do, techniques that are out there.
They have started disinformation campaigns that went worldwide, and if you analyze those, you start to see elements of the common Russian disinformation playbook.
They would take stuff, that actual events that were in the world press that actually happened, and then weave together a story.
And they actually created fake documents, essentially, and then put them into the mainstream media.
There was this smuggling children, adopting children in Latin America and killing them for their body parts. And the AIDS disinformation is the classic example.
The U.S. created the AIDS virus.
They originally started it in a newspaper in India called The Patriot, which was run by KGB.
They also then brought in an expert, a real doctor, to take on this story and advance it in medical circles.
And then it got picked up by TASS, the Soviet news agency, and Novosti, and they would spread it around the world. And one time, actually, Dan Rather repeated it in March 30th, 1987 on CBS News from Novosti Military Bulletin.
A Soviet military publication claims the virus that causes AIDS leaked from a U.S. Army laboratory conducting experiments in biological warfare. The article offers no hard evidence, but claims to be reporting the conclusions of unnamed scientists in the United States, Britain, and East Germany.
He didn't characterize it as disinformation, he sort of played it as a straight news story.
This is a disinformation story that went from the Kremlin to Dan Rather's lips, and for them, that's victory.
I retired in May from State Department, where I was the senior counter-disinformation officer for the Global Engagement Center, which is that part of state that has the mission of countering foreign state-sponsored propaganda and disinformation.
Disinformation is just lies. It's putting out false information to confuse and distract and to make you question real information.
It's an industrial type of machine to come up with lies on a regular basis to make the United States look bad.
We know that on both the United States side and the Soviet side, there were government-driven propaganda efforts that were so consistent across time that you could see that they were being nationally choreographed.
The past few days, when I've been at that window upstairs, I've thought a bit of the shining city upon a hill.
Don't look to the United States as this shining city on a hill, Ronald Reagan's phrase, but actually as this bunch of hypocrites who are pretending they're a shining city on the hill, but actually what they have is a facade.
At the same point, Russia will use a moral equivalency argument. They will say, well, the U.S. does this too. But the U.S.'s version of influence has been very different. It's using media, essentially, and information news outlets to put forth information in these audience spaces.
The first way in which you shape perception of something you don't know very much about is you put it into play. You make you aware of it. You do that with high levels of repetition. So to the extent that you have the same message repeated a lot, and then tied to things that have enough reality that if you checked, you wouldn't say, oh, well, no, that's discredited. They're propagandizing me. So you take something that's real, you magnify its typicality. You suggest that this isn't an isolated instance, this is a typical instance. And then you try to increase the likelihood that it's evocative and dramatic.
They reference real places. They might take 80% of the content and duplicate it from real news sources. But from those basic facts, they then add layers to it, or add 1 to 2 elements to it which are really false. This is disinformation. And they just build upon that. Manipulated truths are easier to advance than false campaigns because there is a kernel of truth there. The best way to do this is to identify content in the audience space that suits the Kremlin's needs, grab that content, repurpose it, rebroadcast it, or add a layer of opinion to it and then put it back into the audience space. From the Kremlin's perspective, it's find anyone that's anti-US, anti-EU, anti-NATO, anti-government, anybody that believes conspiracies, grab their content, and if they are Americans, repurpose that content and push it back in, amplify it.
I would say the core concept is erosion of trust. So that's erosion of trust between people and their government, erosion of trust in the ability of the government to do its job, erosion of trust between different groups of people within a country, so societal divisions, erosion of trust in the information ecosystem.
They don't have that magnetic draw that our values do as in the values of other Western countries. So they are forced to manipulate tensions in other societies, try to make things worse. So institutions that oppose them, like NATO, they can break them apart. Then they face, with a huge military of their own, they face a number of smaller countries, any one of which they can intimidate in a one-to-one. They can't intimidate NATO because it includes the United States and it's very united. So they're going to try to undermine NATO, they're going to try to undermine the EU, they're going to try to undermine Western governments that oppose them, and they're going to use all sorts of nefarious techniques.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.